Hey guys, tonight we re-heading back to a time when alarm clocks didn't exist because your schedule was dictated by the flooding of a mighty river.
You're in ancient Egypt now, and it's just before sunrise.
You lie on a woven mat on a rooftop, surrounded by the soft coos of pigeons and the earthy smell of dust, reeds, and yesterday's dinner. Below, the slow, sloshing rhythm of the Nile hums like a lullaby or maybe a wake-up call. A faint golden hue creeps over the edge of the horizon. The Nile is stirring, and so are you. Right. You probably won't survive this. No offense, it's just that between the unpredictable hippos, the ever-looming plague of scorpions, and the fact that bread might crack your teeth. Ancient Egyptian mornings were less cozy breakfast nook and more soft chaos. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. Always love seeing where and when you're retuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Stretch as the sky shifts from lavender to peach. This is when everything begins in Egypt, not by clock, but by the Nile. The river's cycle is the heartbeat of life. It's flooding season, and the fields are finally free from labor. You've got a brief window of calm. This morning, your job is simple. Wake, eat, survive the sun. The village is a patchwork of low, flat homes, most made of mudbrick and roofed with woven reeds. You hear a neighbor shout gently for a goat that's wandered too far. And someone nearby is already fanning a small fire, trying to coax a flame from smoldering charcoal. Your feet touch the cool, packed earth, and the chill of pre-dawn sand seeps into your bones. You follow your nose, past a sleepy cow and some precariously stacked clay jars, toward the scent of roasting grain. It smells like ... warm dust and comfort. Across Egypt, mornings start like this. Whether you're a farmer, a scribe, or even a royal priest, the world greets you with rising light and hunger. For a peasant, the first meal of the day is humble leftover bread, splash of sour beer, maybe a fig if yesterday was generous. For wealthier folk, or those living within temple compounds, mornings might include things you've evenly read about in museum labels. Honey-glazed bread shaped like ducks, or lentil stew warmed slowly in a bronze pot. But no matter your status, the rhythm is the same. You eat before the sun fully claims the sky, before the heat melts logic and turns work into endurance. Children munch on last night's date paste, smeared onto crusty bread. Elderly women kneel in courtyards, grinding grain with rhythmic patience, their hands moving like waves. This isn't just food, ritual, memory, muscle. In bigger homes, servants are already at work, blowing gently into fire pots, turning skewers of leftover fish, and clanking about with ceramic bowls filled with spiced porridge. Even the cats are busy darting underfoot, hoping for scraps. One flicks its tail against your shin like it owns you. It does, and the Nile watches all of it. A mirror of sky now, gold-flecked and lazy, but it holds power over everything. When it floods, your crops thrive. When it dots, you wouldn't be eating breakfast. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian ate 3 meals a day or just 2, but morning food seems to show up in tomb paintings, kitchen remains, and even the dusty corners of ancient jokes scratched onto shards of pottery. You picture one scribe scribbling a note. A loaf too hard to chew is the Pharaohs' punishment, or something equally relatable. And now, you're sitting on a worn mat outside your home, legs folded, a simple meal in your lap. Maybe it's a bowl of stewed lentils with a drizzle of sesame oil. Maybe it's yesterday's bread dipped into beer so sour it makes your lips pucker. It's not glamorous, but it's warm, and you feel full enough to keep going. The sun peaks higher now, and the world wakes faster. Someone bangs on a copper drum temple call. A boatman shouts over the reeds. A monkey chatters somewhere. You glance at the sky and take another bite. You'll need the energy for whatever task awaits. Maybe fishing. Maybe harvesting reeds for papyrus. Or maybe just hauling water jars up and down a dusty path. But for now, there's a moment of calm. You sip thick, unfiltered beer from a clay cup. It's got bits in it, don't ask. You eat a date, its syrupy sweetness sticking to your teeth. You chew slowly, hearing the faint flap of ibis wings above. Not a bad start, you think? Even if you're expected to scrub a courtyard with your bare hands by noon, You finish your humble breakfast just as the village begins to hum with energy. From every corner, people emerged barefoot, half-dressed, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. Clay jugs clink against wooden yokes as women balance water from nearby canals. Children dart between legs, chasing each other with reed toys and squealing laughter. Somewhere in the distance, a donkey begins to complain about life, loudly. This morning, you're heading toward the granary. Today's task is sorting emmer, one of Egypt's favorite grains. And as you walk, your thoughts drift toward something more essential than the Pharaoh's latest decree: food. And how much better it would be if you lived just slightly higher up the social ladder. Because breakfast in Egypt doesn't just depend on what's available, it depends on who you are. Let's say you're still a peasant, like most of the population. That's not a bad thing necessarily. Your mornings are simple: bread, beer, maybe a vegetable or dried fruit if the gods are smiling. You wake with the sun, work hard, eat what's on hand, and sleep on a roof under the stars. But suppose you're a temple scribe or a minor official in the local palace. Now your mornings include options: a wider variety of fruit, stew that's more than just lentils, actual meat on festival days, and someone else to grind your flour for you. And then there are the true elites: high priests, court advisors, or heaven help you, the pharaoh himself. Pharaonic breakfasts aren't just meals, they're performances. Imagine trays stacked with still warm flatbreads shaped like flowers, pomegranate seeds arranged in spirals, grilled duck crisped to golden brown, bowls of honey, fresh cheese wrapped in fig leaves, and perhaps a flute player to provide ambience. Because why chew in silence when a harpist could score your eggs? You, however, are not the pharaoh. So your breakfast remains plain: one clay bowl, one crusty hunk of barley bread, and the leftovers of whatever stew you scraped together last night, and possibly sand in your porridge. Always with the sand. It's not entirely your fault. You grind your grain using saddle querns, basically two stones rubbing together like they in a slow-motion wrestling match. The result is flour, yes, but it's also got a good helping of stone grit. Historians examining mummy teeth have found severe wear patterns. Egyptians had astonishingly bad dental health, thanks in large part to breakfast. There's even a fringe theory popular among mainstream scholars that some upper-class Egyptians may have developed softer, more refined methods of grinding or sifting to avoid this issue. But for most of you, you carefully or risk starting your day with a molar crisis. Despite this, food is joy. Even the smallest morsel feels sacred when you've worked for it. You tear into your bread, dunk it into beer. You nibble on a wedge of goat cheese that tastes oddly, enthusiastic. Children gather in little clusters to eat as well. Theirs is a breakfast of mashed legumes, maybe some cucumber if it's in season, or the occasional boiled egg if the family has chickens. Chickens aren't native to Egypt. By the way, they came later, from Asia. But by your time, they've made themselves quite comfortable here, pecking around and looking smug. Nearby, your neighbor, an older woman with arms strong as river rope, blesses her morning porridge and mutters thanks to Hathor, the goddess of nourishment and joy. It's believed she watches over meals and music and the pleasant sides of life. Not a bad breakfast companion, if you ask me. But not all breakfasts are equal or even fair. While you crack your teeth on sand bread, the pharaoh begins his morning under a canopy of painted stars. He doesn't lift a finger. Servants fan him with ostrich feathers, anoint him with oil, probably even preach you his breakfast. His food arrives in gold-trimmed baskets, prepared by elite palace chefs who've trained for years to avoid poisoning anyone important. What he eats, that's still up for debate. Tomb paintings and temple offerings suggest ducks, beef, spiced lentils, honey-sweetened pastries, and exotic fruits. But whether those were daily meals or just ritual imagery, no one agrees entirely. Historians still argue whether the pharaoh's food was as rich as depicted, or whether symbolic depictions exaggerated abundance for divine messaging. In short, his breakfast may have looked great on a tomb wall, but less so in real life. Still, you can't help but daydream about it. As you carry your grain sack toward the granary, you imagine the texture of roasted goose, the sweetness of fresh pomegranate juice, the joy of not having to eat the same dusty loaf every single morning. You glance up at the palace, walls smooth, high, and shimmering in the morning light. The elite live behind it, in rooms cooled by fans and filled with music. You sigh and adjust your sack. At least your breakfast didn't come with political stress or court intrigue. A nearby scribe waves as he passes by, his tablet under one arm, chewing something that smells suspiciously like garlic and lentils. You nod back. Even scribes have to eat, and rumor has it the temple kitchens serve them better than most. As the granary gates creak open and you shuffle into the cool darkness, your stomach grumbles again, already. Breakfast in Egypt might be early, but it's rarely filling. You'll make do. A few grains stashed in your pouch, a fig saved for later. And if the overseer's in a good mood, a break before the sun reaches its peak, but don't count on it. Inside the granary, it's cool, dim, and smells like old straw, sweat, and dust that has been aging in peace since the reign of your great-great-grandfather as least impressive uncle. You breathe in slowly, trying not to inhale a lungful of powdered grain, and join the line of workers, already knee-deep in today's task, sorting, measuring, and moving sacks of emmer and barley. Breakfast is barely digested, and you're already lifting sacks that feel heavier than your dreams of early retirement in Thebes. But even here, in the heart of labor, food lingers in conversation. Over the grunts and scraping of baskets, someone asks, "You tried that new lentil mash from the priest's quarter?" Another scoffs. "It's just old stew with more cumin." Can't help but smile. Food in ancient Egypt wasn't just sustenance. It was a shared language. It's a social glue, and sometimes even a form of protest. Bread too moldy? Complain to the baker? Beer too weak? Grumble in the market? Porridge missing onions? It's practically a national emergency. And everyone has opinions on onions? They're everywhere in stews and salads in your breath for the next 12 hours. Workers believed onions gave strength. Priests thought they symbolized eternity with their layered structure. Pharaohs had them buried in their tombs, probably as a backup snack. It's still early, and as sunlight filters through the slats in the walls, you overhear someone reminiscing about their last feast day meal. Now that was a breakfast cattle roasted whole. Bread shaped like cattle, wine, figs, beer, honey cakes, and enough garlic to make even the gods tear up. Those grand meals come rarely tied to religious festivals or royal birthdays, but when they do, it's a buffet for the ages. Still, you're reminded that even ordinary days like this one revolve around food. The granary isn't just a warehouse, it's the nerve center of Egypt's food economy. Every sack is counted, taxed, stored, or redistributed. Some grains go to temple workers, some to public rations, and others to markets or as payment for labor, literal edible money. And sometimes, tastier than the alternatives. You catch a glimpse of an overseer scratching notes on a tablet. You wonder if he gets better rations. Probably his tunic is cleaner than yours, and his morning breath doesn't smell like fermented turnips. The system is rigid. Pharaoh at the top, gods just above him, and everyone else falling into neat rows. But despite the hierarchy, Egyptian society managed to keep millions of mouths fed. Somehow, most of the time, historians still argue whether food distribution in ancient Egypt was as efficient as temple records claim, or whether peasants often faced shortages during droughts and mismanaged floods. The records brag, but the archaeology occasionally disagrees. Think about last year's flood: too low, too short. The grain yields were terrible, and your family scraped through winter on dried beans and cracked wheat. Your aunt even sold her best weaving to buy 2 jars of date syrup. That syrup, by the way, is still unopened. You're saving it for a wedding, or the end of the world. Whichever comes first. A young boy nearby is humming as he stacks baskets, his tune strangely catchy. You hum along. Even under backbreaking labor, there's rhythm, pattern, and the constant whisper of what meal might come next. Today, you'll be paid with bread and beer, your daily rations. And if the sun isn't cruel, maybe a bonus handful of lentils or dried fish. The workers in the temple across town are said to get better beer, less sour, more body. You've heard rumors of beer flavored with dates or herbs, but that seems like the stuff of dreams. Beer, by the way, is everyone's drink. Rich or poor, old or young. It's thick, porridge-like, and full of nutrients, more like drinking a soft loaf of bread than sipping something elegant. It's not the frothy pint you might imagine today. Instead, it's a chunky, fermented experience that leaves your lips coated in grain in your stomach, sort of satisfied. You once tried beer made from red barley. It was a gift during the festival of Bastet. Tasted like someone left soup in the sun, but it was festive. As you carry another basket to the weighing scale, the scent of something strange floats in. Grilled onions and roasted chickpeas. A temple kitchen nearby, perhaps. Your stomach growls. Again, even mid-morning, food is never far from your mind. And not just any food, dream food. Roasted quail wrapped in vine leaves. Soft goat cheese folded into honeyed cakes. Dried dates pressed into little bricks and flavored with cinnamon. Some of these you've only heard about in song or temple murals. It's the great tease of Egyptian life. You work near wealth, near food, near stories about saffron rice and pickled fish wrapped in papyrus, but you eat the same thing every morning: bread, beer, and occasionally beans. If you're lucky, you wipe the sweat from your brow and pause under a shade awning. A vendor passes by, carrying a tray of morning snacks, likely selling to overseers and clerks. Roasted lupins, spiced lentil balls, warm flatbread with zeder-like seasoning. You could smell it halfway across the granary. You dig around your linen sash for a copper devon. Nothing, you sigh. Maybe next festival. You slip away from the granary just after midday, shoulders aching, throat dry, and stomach still nursing the memory of this morning's modest meal. The Nile glints in the distance, and your feet find their way to a narrow street lined with open stalls and shouting vendors. Midday in the market district is both a sensory delight and a minor threat to your personal space. You weave through bodies, ducks, and at least one goat trying to climb a basket of garlic. The sun has taken its job too seriously, baking the clay walls to a shimmering haze. Somewhere, someone is frying something. And the smell is heavenly crispy chickpeas laced with coriander and the telltale bite of garlic. You pause near a spice seller's table. Sacks of cumin, coriander, fenugreek, and dried mint are laid out like painter's pigments. These aren't just for flavor, they're medicine, trade goods, and in some temples, offerings to the gods. A few stray grains cling to your sandals, as if begging to be part of your next stew. A woman with nimble fingers is stringing dried figs onto palm fiber twine, creating a kind of edible necklace. It's beautiful, and probably delicious. You wonder briefly if you could sneak one, then you remember last time, 2 days in temple, lock up for accidental fig borrowing, never again. As you wander, you overhear a heated debate between two older men about whether dried locusts should count as a morning protein. One insists they're good luck and crunchy in a satisfying way. The other mutters something about never trusting food with wings. This is ancient Egyptian street food at its finest. Your thoughts drift again. What is the typical Egyptian morning meal, really? You've eaten what's available, sure, but the broader question lingers. What patterns existed across classes, regions, and centuries? Historians, of course, still argue whether daily food habits stayed consistent across Egypt's 3,000-year history. What we know comes mostly from tomb paintings, food remnants, offering lists, and the occasional hilariously judgmental scroll. One famous scribal note from the New Kingdom lists acceptable morning foods. For temple staff, barley bread, pomegranate juice, a pinch of salt, and water. It also bans unripened fish and onions before prayer. Apparently, no one wants to chant next to someone with garlic breath. But outside the temples, daily habits vary wildly. Along the delta, where the soil is rich and the crops abundant, breakfast might include fava bean mash, cucumber slices, and even smoked catfish. Inland, near desert settlements, options dwindle: grain, legumes, and sometimes preserved turnip or fermented dairy. That's right, fermented dairy. Imagine yogurt that's somehow both too sour and not sour enough. A breakfast thrill ride for your taste buds. You tried it once at your cousin's place? Never again. You duck into the shade of a small courtyard where a woman is preparing dough on a flat stone. Her arms move with practiced ease, forming each loaf in the shape of a tiny crocodile. It's said that these whimsical designs were meant to honor Sobek, the crocodile god, and maybe prevent actual crocodiles from snacking on fishermen. You watch as she sprinkles coriander seeds into the dough and sets them beside a low clay oven. The heat is intense, the smell even more so. If you had a coin for every time you were distracted by the scent of fresh bread, you'd have at least 3 coins. you'd still spend them on bread. A boy walks by with a tray of boiled eggs, seasoned with salt and something sharp mustard seeds, maybe. You trade a grin. He's already sold half the tray, judging by the empty shells bouncing around in his satchel. Breakfast on the go, 1300 BCE style. Back in the street, a camel blocks your path. Not metaphorically, literal camel. It stares at you with disdain and refuses to move. You sidestep into a little alley that smells faintly of date syrup and fermented fish. Charming. You emerge into a quieter square, where a priest from the local temple is lecturing to apprentices on ritual food taboos. No garlic before sunrise prayer, no beer on fasting days, and never accept onions from someone in mourning. The apprentices look confused. One is clearly sneaking a fig behind his mentor's back. You've heard of these taboos before. Some priests avoid certain foods not just for ritual cleanliness, but to honor specific deities. Hathor likes sweets and honey. Osiris is associated with grain. Set probably eats chaos and sandstorms for breakfast. There are also mystical beliefs around food. Eating lentils was once thought to bring wisdom. Figs good for fertility. Leeks, symbol of rebirth. Crocodile fat, applied externally, was supposedly a sunburn cure and a breakfast spread. You'd prefer just the first use, thanks. Somewhere nearby, a harp begins to play a slow, gentle tune. It's likely a hired musician trying to attract patrons to a tavern. You drift toward the sound and peek into a shaded seating area. A group of older men are passing around a shared bowl of fruit mashed mostly dates, softened with beer, topped with crumbled flatbread. Their laughter is slow, sleepy, sun-drunk. You sit down on the edge of a low stone bench, letting your feet rest. Your breakfast this morning was simple bread, beer, a bit of cheese butt here in this square. It's clear that even modest ingredients can become something more with a little creativity or the right company. You close your eyes for a moment. It's the music, the smells, the warmth of the stone. It all blends together. You don't need the Pharaoh's breakfast. Not today. You've got sun-warmed bread, spice in the air, and the promise of something better tomorrow. You wake from your midday nap with a start still, seated on that sun-warmed bench in the market square. A fly buzzes somewhere near your ear, and the distant bleat of a goat reminds you that time has passed. The square is quieter now, the chaos of morning shifting into the lull of afternoon. Your stomach makes its presence known again, loudly. This time, your thoughts wander not to bread or beans, but to something sweet. You shuffle toward a vendor you vaguely remember from Festival Seasana, man known for spinning magic out of fruit and honey. He's there, tucked in the shadow of a sandstone wall, arranging tiny cakes on a woven mat. You recognize them immediately. Dried fig tarts with crushed almonds. Honey-roasted dates, and little palm-sized pastries stuffed with something sticky and fragrant. You're not entirely sure what's inside, probably dates and ground tiger nut. Or maybe a dab of lotus root if the seller's feeling generous. The man sees you eyeing them and grins. "1 Devon," he says. You pat your sash again. Still no coins. He shrugs. "Next time, dreamer." You offer a half bow and move along. In ancient Egypt, sweets aren't just indulgences. They're spiritual currency. Ni is a divine gift, associated with the sun god Ra. Dates are a symbol of fertility and long life. Even the tiger nut, humble though it may sound, is considered a high-end treat. Crushed and mixed with honey or wine, it forms the base of some of the earliest confections ever recorded. You pass by a household shrine tucked just outside a doorway. On the ledge rest small offerings. 2 pieces of bread, a clump of mashed dates, and what looks like a scoop of fig paste. These aren't just for the living spirits, get breakfast too, and they get the good stuff. Offerings to the dead often included foods the living could barely afford. Tombs of nobles feature murals showing elaborate meals, honey cakes, spiced wines, roast duck, soft cheeses wrapped in fig leaves, and bowls overflowing with fruit. Food in the afterlife was a promise not just of sustenance, but of status. Of course, whether the dead actually received their celestial snacks is up for debate. Historians still argue whether offering rituals were symbolic, or if priests actively replaced spoiled offerings. Some texts suggest daily food swaps in high-ranking tombs. Others hint at imagined consumption where just the image of food was thought to nourish the ka, or spirit. You like the idea that art feeds the dead? It means those beautifully painted breakfasts, the ones with papyrus-wrapped bread? Loaves and honey-slicked grapes aren't tea just for show. They're eternal meals in eternal kitchens. As you walk on, you pass a baker's shop. The scent of hot flour and cracked grain hits you full force. Inside, round loaves cool on a low stone shelf, and a teenage apprentice dusts them with cumin and salt. You catch him eyeing you. He lifts a loaf. You hesitate. He tosses it. You catch it. Maybe the gods are watching today. You sit again, this time on the edge of a canal, legs dangling over the water. You break open the loaf. The crust is crisp and dark, likely scorched at the edges by the clay oven's fire. Inside, it's soft, faintly sour, with whole barley grains folded into the dough. A boatman glides by and gives you a nod. He's chewing on something, probably raw radish or pickled turnip. River snacks. Everyone's got their thing. And you realize something? While the Pharaoh's kitchen might have golden platters and liven bakers, your life still tastes like Egypt. Every crust, every grain, every stolen fig tart is part of the same vast, delicious tradition. Somewhere behind you, a temple bell rings. Time for offerings. Time for food. You look at the loaf in your hand. A simple thing, just grain, water, salt. Fire, but behind it lies a whole world. Farmers in the fields, priests in the temples, workers in the granary, bakers, brewers, fig paste vendors. All connected by the daily ritual of feeding themselves and the gods. You take another bite and let it sit on your tongue a while. In truth, Egyptian sweets weren't an everyday affair for most people. They were celebratory, reserved for weddings, festivals, births, or a good harvest. Yet even the simplest households found ways to sneak in sweetness. Crushed dates stirred into porridge. Honey thinned with water and poured over bread, or melon slices chilled in Nile water. You remember your grandmother's trick leaving pomegranate seeds in a clay pot overnight, sprinkled with coriander? By morning, they'd absorb the spice and soften like jewels. She claimed it cured sadness. You weren't sure if that was true, but it tasted like it might be. A gust of warm air rustles the reeds, and somewhere across the water, a child laughs. You lean back, belly full enough, brain just fuzzy enough to drift again. Before you slip too far into sleep, one last thought tickles your brain. In this world of temples and toil, of gods and grain, maybe breakfast isn't just the start of the day. Maybe it's the soul's reminder that even here in the dust, the heat, the hunger life, can still taste like honey. You wake again just as the sky begins to dim, that warm golden hour where everything seems to slow down except your thoughts. They float back to that fig tart you didn't eat, and your mind starts to wander again. If sweets were sacred and grains were life, what about meat? Meat, you've noticed, is rare in your life. On festival days, sure, you've had duck once, maybe twice, and fish from the canal more often than you'd like. But beef, lamb? Goose stuffed with garlic and wrapped in lotus leaves? Those aren't peasant fare. Those are pyramid-tier delicacies. Still, it's not like meat didn't exist for everyday Egyptians. It just depended heavily on your status. Pharaohs and high priests ate lavishly, their kitchens staffed with butchers, fishers, and cooks who could name 40 ways to roast a quail. In contrast, you've named one. Cook it until it doesn't cluck. A low bleat draws your attention. You turn and spot a shepherd herding a dozen goats through the alley. One pauses to nibble a fig leaf hanging from someone's balcony. The shepherd waves you off before you can even ask. No meat today. Back in the market, a small group of men are gathered around a butcher's stall. A wide table holds strips of something dark and glossy, rubbed with garlic and dried coriander. Smells rich, a little sour, deeply savory, jerky. Salted meat was a way to preserve luxury if you couldn't afford a fresh goose. Maybe you could afford a scrap of preserved beef fat. You watch as a customer exchanges a small clay amulet, likely a family heirloom, for a palm-sized piece. Meat as currency. You feel slightly better about your bread. Across the way, a young girl is plucking fish from a shallow woven basket, gutting them with something between efficiency and revenge. She salts them, presses them flat, and stacks them between layers of papyrus. These will dry under the sun, perhaps smoked slightly if her father remembers to burn the tamarisk wood. In a few days, they'll be sold as dried fish cakes, another breakfast option for those with less access to grain. You tried one once. The flavor was ... memorable, and that's the odd thing. For all Egypt's reputation as a grain kingdom and, truly, grain was the backbone protein still made its way onto breakfast platters, especially in fishing villages or during flood season, when wild geese and fish were more plentiful. But meat also had meaning. Certain animals were taboo depending on region and religion. In some parts, pigs were considered unclean, yet in others, they were raised in pens and salted for feasts. Historians still argue whether pork was socially restricted or simply a regional preference. 2 murals occasionally show pig herding, but they're far outnumbered by the scenes of cattle, geese, and fish. There's a tale you recall, told by one of the older workers, a nobleman whose diet included only meat of animals whose feet did not touch the ground. He floated ducks in ponds, geese on rush mats, and even had slaves carry small calves to avoid soil contact. You suspect he also insisted on breakfast, served by gold-plated monkeys. Must have been exhausting. Back in your corner of the city, meat is usually flavoring, not the main act. Stew might contain a few strips of dried goat. Porridge might get a spoon of fish oil. But the idea of waking up to a full roast duck? Fantasy. You once saw a temple cook roast an entire ox? It was part of a sacrifice. One of those elaborate ceremonies where the gods were offered the best of everything. Of course, the gods never actually ate the food, so guess who got to feast afterward? That's right, the priests. And maybe if you were lucky and standing near the back with a hungry look, someone might pass you a scrap. You weren't lucky. Still, meat found its way into daily life in curious ways. Remember your cousin's breakfast stew-a-thin? Salty broth flavored with bones boiled twice, and lentils so soft they dissolved if you looked at them too hard? It wasn't much, but if you closed your eyes and focused on the smoky flavor, it almost tasted rich. A neighbor once told you about a breakfast he had at a noble's home, where he was working as a mason. Boiled eggs, fresh duck liver, fried locusts with honey glaze. I wept, he said. It was the first time my stomach bowed to my tongue. You imagine that for most Egyptians? Breakfast wasn't about indulgence. It was about survival, yes, but also comfort. A meal to steady the hands before labor, to soothe the mind after prayer, or to start the day with something warm, something remembered. As dusk settles and oil lamps flicker on across the city, the butcher's stall begins to close. Leftover scraps are fed to dogs, salted for later, or if especially choice, sold quietly to someone slipping a few extra coins from a folded sash. You walk away, again empty-handed, again dreaming, not just of honey cakes and roasted quail, but of the people who turned food into ritual, into symbol, into history itself. Maybe tomorrow you'll have fish, or maybe just lentils. But tonight you remember that even without beef and goose, your breakfast has roots in a civilization so old its recipes whisper in tomb walls. Night deepens over the Nile, but your dream continues, smoothing itself into a warm, familiar rhythm. You're still wandering barefoot now, your feet padded with fine dust, the air scented faintly of embers and clay. The city sleeps, mostly. A few windows glow softly. A cat slinks past you, tail curled like a question mark. Your stomach's quiet for once, and your mind drifts toward something else. The kitchens themselves. You start picturing them not just the open-air bread stalls and market spitbutt. The real deal. The kitchens behind noble houses. The ones tucked into temples. The palace kitchens you'll never see unless you're a ghost or a goose. And yet tonight you were both. You push open an imaginary wooden door and step into the heart of a wealthy Egyptian kitchen. It's not what you'd expect. No granite counters or fancy decor. Just efficient, smart design. The room is semi-open to the air, probably to keep the heat moving out. There's a hearth set low on the floor, still smoldering from last night's feast. Hanging above it, clay pots, bronze ladles, wicker baskets, dried herbs, tied in elegant loops. A young cook is grinding something in a shallow stone mortar. Smells sharp and nutty, likely fenugreek, maybe caraway. He doesn't notice you. Ghosts don't interrupt me's in place. To his left, another assistant is shaping dough into flat discs, pricking them with a wooden pin. These will puff in the clay oven's belly, char at the edges, and be stacked like thin pillows for tomorrow's dawn. Kitchens in ancient Egypt were multi-purpose spaces. They weren't only for cooking, they were places of ritual, preservation, sometimes even burial preparation. Food and death were linked here in strange, sacred ways. Bread dough could feed the living or be pressed into tiny models to accompany the dead. Dates could sweeten porridge or be stuffed into the open mouth of a mummy as a symbolic meal. You drift to a smaller room beside the kitchen, cold pantry lined with clay jars. Some are sealed with wax. Others are open, revealing pickled onions, soaked garlic bulbs, salted fish, and jars of thick, dark honey. One curious jar has layers like a trifle, but terrifying. It starts with crushed chickpeas, then a layer of dried herbs. It's followed by preserved lemon slices, then something pink and wobbly. You lean closer. Is that fermented radish? Historians still argue whether certain Egyptian preservation techniques were for taste, practicality, or spiritual cleansing. Some recipes survive only as hints lists of ingredients on the back of papyri, vague scribbles that read like ancient Pinterest boards. Take the fish, salt it until quiet. Add herbs, wrap in linen. Wait for dreams. You step back into the kitchen as the fire flares. One of the cooks startles, mutters a quick prayer to base, the squat, lion-faced god of households and kitchens. His idol sits in the corner grinning, tongue out halfway between adorable and alarming. It's easy to forget how much religion was cooked into daily life. You'd whisper a charm over your bread dough to keep it from splitting. Offer a fig to Isis before biting it yourself. Even a burnt crust could be assigned, though whether from gods or gremlins, no one could say. In the Grand Temple kitchens, things were even more intense. Everything prepared for the gods followed strict purity codes. Certain foods couldn't touch others. Certain knives could only be used once. Priests often shaved their entire bodies to avoid contaminating the sacred meals with stray hairs. You wonder if any of them ever thought, I just wanted to roast an onion. But the gods had to at least, be offered the illusion of it. Divine meals were laid out daily: bread, beer, fruits, meats, incense. Some say the offerings vanished into spirit. Others whispered the more practical truth: the priests ate well. And the royal kitchens. Oh, those were culinary kingdoms in themselves. Dozens of cooks, brewers, butchers, servants. One team just for bread, another for sauces, yet another. If you believe the more dramatic scribes, was tasked with sculpting sugar birds for the Pharaohs' amusement. Sugar didn't tea even exist yet in the region, so maybe it was date syrup, molded into bird shapes. Still, you admire the ambition. Back outside in your own less luxurious quarter, things are simpler. You recall the neighbor's courtyard, where breakfast is prepped in the glow of the rising sun. Her kids grind flour while she stirs lentils over a low flame. There's no pantry here. Everything is eaten or bartered within the day. A chicken clucks softly in the corner, unaware of how precarious her position becomes on festival mornings. There's something humble and beautiful about it, this slow, steady rhythm of food preparation. It's not about perfection. It's about warmth, community, repetition, doing it every single day. Even when the lentils burn or the neighbor's goat eats your last onion, sit again, invisible in the corner of your imagined kitchen, watching steam rise from a fresh pot of barley porridge. Someone sprinkled crushed dates over it, maybe a hint of cinnamon bark. You can smell the spice, faint but persistent, like memory. Tomorrow, when the workers rise, someone will ladle this into shallow clay bowls, wrap a piece of bread beside it, and call it breakfast. And it will be enough. It has been enough for millennia. The sun creeps back across the Nile, thin and yellow, like diluted honey, stretched beneath a papyrus awning, the scent of wood smoke clinging to your tunic, and your mind, once again, wanders this time toward the people behind the meals. It's one thing to bite into a date cake or sip barley beer, but who made it? Who decided how thick the porridge should be, whether to roast the leeks or pickle them, when to add coriander, and when to use cumin? You imagine them now? Cooks, servants, brewers, butchers, the unsung breakfast brigade of ancient Egypt. Most cooks were women, not always, but often. In homes, especially those of modest means, the lady of the house and her daughters prepared food daily. You picture them rising before the light knees dusted with flour, hands calloused from grinding grain, eyes still heavy with dreams. The rhythm of grinding, kneading, stirring it, was muscle memory passed down like lullabies. Typical morning might begin with the soft shick of a grindstone. Two women, perhaps mother and daughter, kneel across from each other, working the long oval stone against a flat base, crushing emmer wheat into fine flour. It's tiring. The motion repeats hundreds of times before a single loaf can take shape. Modern scholars examining ancient skeletons have found worn knees and uneven arm bones in women, likely from decades of bread making. And this is before they even light the fire. You recall the baker's daughter from 2 streets over, tiny, bird-like, and fast. She could shape a dozen loaves before your second blink. Her fingers moved like spells. She once told you she dreamed of becoming a priestess, but bread was more reliable than divinity. Plus, she liked the smell. Larger homes might employ professional cooks, both male and female. Some were enslaved. Others were paid servants, their skills well respected. A talented cook could gain favor quickly. Quickly good food has always opened doors. Some even carved their names on tomb walls, proud of their recipes. One inscription reads, "He who fed the lords of lotus and gold, who sweetened their mouths before the sun rose." Pretty dramatic for a guy who made porridge, but you respect it. Then there were brewers. Brewing beer was also a female-dominated task, especially in earlier periods. Beer wasn't just for fun, it was nutrition in a jug. Breakfast in liquid form. Children drank it. Laborers chugged it. Priests blessed it. Even the gods demanded it. You once heard that the goddess Hathor was pacified with red beer, dyed to look like blood during a particularly violent divine tantrum. It worked. She got tipsy, danced in the fields, and forgot her rage. You wonder if the same trick would work on your old neighbor with the loud chickens? And what about the farmers? Without them, there's no breakfast at all. Picture a man walking the edge of a barley field, ankle-deep in mud, dragging a wooden plow behind an ox. The sun's barely up, and his belly is growling, but the irrigation channel needs clearing, and the barley won't sow itself. He hums a little song, something rhythmic to keep his pace. Maybe he's thinking of the lentil stew waiting at home. Or maybe he's imagining something far grander, a honey-soaked loaf or a bite of roast fish. His wife is probably home, stoking the fire, heating the porridge, swatting flies away from the flatbread. Their kids squabble over dates while she ladles the breakfast into small clay bowls. It's all connected field to kitchen to table, or mat, in most cases. Most Egyptians didn't eat at tables. They sat on the floor or low stools, sharing food communally. It wasn't just sustenance, it was ceremony. Sharing food meant safety, community, belonging. Historians still debate how recipes were passed down. No cookbooks survive from Egypt's earliest periods, not the way we think of them. But food traditions were clearly strong, consistent. You can see it in tomb paintings, in offering lists, in the sheer repetition of ingredients and meals across centuries. It wasn't randomness. It was careful inheritance. Some believe older women served as oral food historians, remembering which herbs helped digestion, which grains rose better with beer versus water, which stews tasted richer after a full moon. Whether that's poetic exaggeration or not, you're inclined to believe it. There's magic in memory. And what's breakfast, if not edible memory? You recall a small, strange woman who lived at the edge of the village. She claimed to be over 100. No one really argued. She made breakfast for children in exchange for stories. "Tell me about the crocodile that stole your sandal," she'd say, "and I'll give you date mash and lentil paste." You remember both being oddly satisfying. She swore by dried coriander, wouldn't cook a thing without it. Claimed it kept the air spirits from souring the dough. You rolled your eyes, but her flatbread never split, and her stew always smelled like comfort. So here you are, centuries later, in this long night dream of ancient kitchens. Remembering women and men who woke before the birds to grind and boil and stir and bless. They didn't have timers or ovens or blenders. They had muscle, ritual, patience, and maybe a tiny clay idol in the corner, watching with a grin. You sit beside one now, invisible and warm, as a cook flips a thin loaf from a pan and the scent of sesame and spice carries gently into the dawn. Your journey continues, gentle and full-bellied now, gliding past kitchens and into something even cozier, mealtime itself. You've wandered through fire pits and flour clouds. But what did it feel like to actually sit down for breakfast in ancient Egypt? It begins with a bowl. It's not a fancy one just, a simple clay vessel. maybe slightly lopsided from a rushed potter's wheel. The surface is warm to the touch, heat from the barley porridge inside radiating through your fingertips. You cradle it the way a sleepy person holds a coffee mug today, like a miniature sun. The porridge is thick, almost chewy. It clings to the wooden spoon in soft, steaming waves. You taste it nutty, faintly sour from the fermenting beer used to thin it. A few crushed dates float on top like lazy boats. Someone's been generous today. You're not alone. Breakfast isn't solitary in this world. It's shared family, neighbors, workers sitting side by side. The mat is woven from reeds. The floor is dusty but swept. Flies buzz lazily overhead but are mostly ignored. The bread is passed around next. Flat, round loaves. Some are hard as roof tiles, these are torn, dipped into lentil stew to soften. Others are warm and pliable, good for wrapping around grilled onions or mashed beans. There's no butter, of course, but someone has brought fig paste, thick and sweet like molasses. You smear it over a slice. It drips onto your thumb. You lick it clean. You glance at the others. Little girl eats while cradling a clay doll. Her father chats softly with an old neighbor. Cat perches on the edge of the mat, calculating its odds. Someone tosses a crust in its direction. Breakfast isn't grand here. It's early. It's quiet, but it's sacred in its own small way. If you were lucky and living in a well-off household, you might find more variety. Eggs, if your family kept ducks or could afford a fresh clutch. Cheese, made from goat milk and pressed into crumbly wedges. Fish, dried or grilled, sprinkled with herbs. Even meat on rare occasions, though that was more of a festival treat. And always there is beer. Yes, beer at breakfast. Don't make that face. This isn't your modern IPA, bursting with hops and poor decisions. Egyptian beer was thick, more like barley soup, sometimes laced with honey or spices. Children drank it.
Elders
sipped it slowly. It provided calories, hydration, and maybe just enough buzz to take the edge off another day hauling bricks in the sun. Historians still argue over how intoxicating ancient beer really was. Some say it was closer to a smoothie, nutritious, vaguely funky, and gently fermented. Others insist there were stronger versions for priests and elites, something with more kick and less chew. You take another sip? It's hard to say. You mostly taste grains and cloves, with a whisper of sweetness that fades too fast. Someone offers you a slice of melon green-fleshed, watery cool against your lips. Fruit wasn't always available, but when it was, it elevated everything. Dates were common. Figs too, but melons. That meant good trade, or a well-connected uncle. And while we're talking luxury honey, golden, fragrant, nearly divine. Honey was prized in Egypt like gold. Sometimes it was gold used as currency, as offering, even as embalming fluid. But in your little breakfast corner, a spoonful of honey is the final touch, swirled into the porridge. Drizzled on lentils, offered to the oldest member of the household first. There's a rhythm to breakfast here. It's not rushed, but not lazy either. People eat with purpose. Talking is soft, practical. Plans for the day? Gossip from the previous evening. Someone chuckles about a neighbor who accidentally wore his wife's sandals to temple. There are no forks, of course. You use your hands, maybe a spoon if you're fancy. Bread becomes a utensil, a scoop, a sponge. You wipe your fingers on a reed cloth. There's no need for plates, just bowls, loaves, pots, and the shared ground. You hear a distant horn call to labor. The moment is almost over. One by one, people rise. Mats are shaken. Bowls rinsed in nearby basins. Leftovers, if any, are packed for mid-morning breaks. The cat gets the last of the lentil mash and seems deeply satisfied. You linger a moment longer, savoring the last sips of beer. Someone hands you a clump of dried dates rolled in sesame. For later, they say, you nod, though you know you won't remember this in the morning. Outside, the day is already heating up. Workers are on the move. Boats slip down the Nile like slow arrows. Children run barefoot between mud-brick walls. Breakfast is over. But the comfort of it lingers, the flavors, the warmth, the unspoken togetherness of eating side by side before the world demands too much. And now, as the scent of porridge and roasted onion fades, your thoughts drift again. What came after breakfast? What rituals, what roles, what surprises awaited once the last loaf was gone? You follow that question into the rising light, full and curious. You're on your feet now, walking slowly, belly full, through the early light of a typical Egyptian morning. Breakfast was just the beginning. Now it's time to digest not just food, but purpose. What happens after the meal? What did people actually do next? Work. Always work. For most ancient Egyptians, breakfast was simply fuel for the labor ahead. And labor came in many forms, some backbreaking, others meticulous, and a few that smelled surprisingly nice. Let's begin with the farmers. Few had land, and even a tiny patch counted. Her post-breakfast schedule was dictated by the Nile. You and the river were partners in a delicate, grumpy marriage. When it flooded, you celebrated. When it didn't, you prayed. Or panicked. After breakfast, a farmer might check irrigation ditches, repair reed fences, or shout at an ox who, despite years of training, still had no idea how to walk in a straight line. You trudge alongside one now, sandals squelching in the thick mud as he mutters about lazy water spirits and grain-eating birds. Not a farmer? Perhaps you're a builder. Then your workday begins with the clang of copper tools and the hiss of ropes stretching taut. Ancient Egypt was one of the world's biggest construction sites for thousands of years. Tombs, temples, palaces. Someone had to lift all those blocks. You walk past a crew now, sipping leftover beer, wiping sleep from their eyes. They re-about to start hauling limestone under a sun that hasn't even finished its morning yawn. It's loud, dusty, and weirdly rhythmic. A man sings a work chant, while another thumps a mallet in time with the beat. You wonder if their breakfast had onions. Can definitely smell onions. Not everyone worked outside. Scribes, those lucky few, headed to shady rooms to scratch away at documents with reed pens. Their breakfasts were probably less sweaty, maybe even served in bowls that weren't chipped. They wrote tax records, marriage contracts, dream interpretations. Yes, that was a real job. If someone dreamt of a talking hippopotamus, a scribe would jot it down and offer an explanation. Historians still argue over just how widespread literacy was. Some believe it was limited to elites and specialized roles. Others suggest more everyday folks could at least recognize basic symbols, especially when it involved food or taxes. As you know, nothing motivates like the fear of grain quotas. Then there were artisans. You walk through a village near Deir el-Medina now, where the Pharaohs' tomb workers lived. Their mornings were spent painting walls, carving limestone, designing elaborate tomb art that no living person was meant to see. Odd, isn't it? To labor day after day on murals that would only be admired by beetles and ghosts. Oh, watch a man mix pigments. Crushed ochre for red, lapis for blue. He dips a brush made from reeds into the bowl and tests a sun disk on a scrap of plaster. It looks radiant, like a little fire. His friend adds an ibis-headed god beside it, half listening to a joke about temple priests and bad wine. You chuckle. Quietly, it's a sleepy joke. If you're a woman, your post-breakfast duties were often domestic. But don't let that word fool you. Running a household in ancient Egypt was like running a logistics firm and an apothecary at the same time. You return to the home you left earlier, where the cook is now rinsing pots with sand. Her daughter is spinning thread. Younger children are herding ducks, not very successfully. Someone knocks over a jar of lentils. A goat escapes. No one screams. It's just a normal morning. One woman is mixing herbs in a bowl. She's making a salve. Possibly for her husband's aching joints, or maybe for her neighbor's rash. It's hard to tell. Ancient Egyptian women were often the family's healers, playing poultices, chanting spells, chewing fenugreek. It's multitasking at its finest. The elite, meanwhile, had their own version of post-breakfast routines. You step briefly into a grander home. A nobleman's wife sits in the garden, a servant brushing her hair with a comb made from ivory. She's discussing jewelry designs with a craftsman. The nobleman, barefoot and wrapped in linen, argues with a scribe about tax exemptions for his cousin. Someone brings a tray of pomegranates. It's all very civilized except for the monkey that's just stolen a fig from the table. Yes, monkeys. Some nobles kept them as pets. It's a bad idea. Great stories. But not all post-breakfast activity was work. Egyptians valued leisure, too. After the morning meal, some people might offer prayers at a household shrine, lighting incense, placing a bit of bread for the ancestors. Others took short walks by the canal, sat in shaded courtyards, or played music. You pause now by a boy playing a small harp. The tune is wobbly, unsure of itself. But it's sweet, like a lullaby that hasn't made up its mind yet. You sit near him, watching the day unfold. In this world, time doesn't rush. Tasks aren't squeezed between pings or alarms. They flow slowly, like the Nile itself. And when midday nears, the rhythm shifts. The sun begins to glare. People retreat to shadows. Work slows. Bodies rest. You think about breakfast again. How that warm bowl set all of this in motion. How the lentils powered the bricklayer. How the barley beer calmed the artist's nerves. How fig paste sweetened the scribe's pen hand. It's all connected, and it's all still lingering in the corners of your dream. You stay seated for a while longer, eyes half closed now, listening to that soft harp and the muffled clatter of daily life moving along its ancient tracks. But eventually you rise, meandering down narrow passageways where incense hangs in the warm air and sandals slap gently against stone. As the morning's work wraps up and the sun grows bolder overhead, you notice the smells shifting again. Lunch is on the way. Not as grand as you might think. If breakfast was a warm-up, lunch is a continuation, a small pause before more labor. But it's not without its charms. You enter a courtyard shaded by date palms, and already someone is grinding chickpeas. A low stone basin, a smooth grinding stone, rhythmic circles. The paste smells earthy, and you catch hints of garlic and coriander. No deep frying here. These are shaped into small flat cakes and baked on hot stones until golden and crisp. It's falafel's great-great-grandparent, perhaps. It's nearby, lentils bubble again, this time with leeks and a pinch of crushed cumin. A woman stirs slowly, humming a tune that drifts lazily over the walls. Her youngest child is chasing a chicken with the earnestness only toddlers possess. Neither of them is winning. Historians still argue over how many formal meals ancient Egyptians ate each day. Some say 2 breakfast and dinner with a light snack around midday. Others suggest 3 meals, especially for elites or those with physically demanding jobs. Whatever the structure, there was always something simple and satisfying tucked into the middle of the day. You lean against the wall, watching a man spread goat cheese on a coarse barley roll. He folds it in half and hands it to a boy, balancing a pot of beer against his shoulder. They laugh about something, probably the chicken. Cheese was a staple by this point in history, though the methods were rustic. Pressed curds, aged just enough not to turn to mush in the sun. Sharp, salty, sometimes mixed with chopped herbs or dates for flavor. Some even say the best cheese was buried underground to ferment. You'd like to believe that's an exaggeration, but your nose tells you it probably wasn't. You take a bite of a cheese-stuffed loaf. It's dense but oddly satisfying. The flavors bloom slowly: nutty barley, tart cheese, a whisper of mint. Sometimes lunch came with fresh vegetables. Onions, garlic, cucumbers, radishes, all pulled from narrow garden plots. If water was scarce, they were chopped raw and eaten with bread. If you were lucky, they might be roasted or tossed with vinegar and oil. And speaking of lucky dates again, but this time rolled into balls with honey and sesame or mashed into a thick jam spread on bread. You watch a woman shape the date, paste with surprising precision, each ball the same size, the same gentle curve. Her fingers move with the muscle memory of thousands of mornings. A group of boys shares a bowl of broad beans, steaming and sprinkled with coriander seed. They eat with their fingers, scooping up the soft, salty mash with tiny wedges of bread. One boy sneezes and drops his entire lunch into the dirt. The others laugh and offer him bits from theirs. The joke follows him all the way to the canal, but so does the sharing. There's something quietly communal about every meal in this place. Food is rarely consumed alone. You're always part of a cluster family, co-workers, friends, even strangers. You pass, and someone gestures for you to join. No words, just a tilt of the head and a space on the mat. So you sit again. The sun filters through palm fronds. Somewhere nearby, a flute begins to play a low, droning tune that feels like it was designed specifically to make your eyelids heavier. You sip from a clay cup beer again, of course. Slightly tangier than the morning brew, a little warmer, but somehow just as welcome. Someone offers pickled fish. You hesitate. The smell is bold, but you take a bite. It's sour and salty, like the sea has secrets you're not entirely sure you want to know. Not bad, just assertive. You reach for another piece anyway. In the background, a grandmother shells lupin beans with her granddaughter. They hum in harmony, then burst into laughter when one of the beans pops and flies into a pot of stew. You'll remember that sound later tonight, somewhere between a dream and a snore. By now, the heat has deepened. Lunch winds down. People lean back, hands on bellies, shoulders softening. A breeze passes through. Dust dances lazily in the air. Even the chickens seem to surrender to stillness. It's a term the Egyptians used. Nea, which described cyclical time. Repeating, soothing, stable. Meals like this were a part of that rhythm. Not events, but constants. The flavors changed slightly with the season. The stories updated from day to day. But the core of it stayed the same. Sit, share, savor, return to the flow. You lie back on a woven mat, hands folded on your stomach, and feel the soft weight of fullness settling in. The sun warms your legs. A cat curls near your side. Somewhere, someone's snoring gently. Or maybe that's just the breeze through the reeds. And now, as the midday light thickens and everything begins to slow, you begin to wonder not about food, but about those who prepared it. The hands behind the flavors, the women, the servants, the specialists who knew when to salt, when to crush, when to let the fire do the work. You'll follow them next. Into their kitchens. Into their stories. But for now, the lentils are doing their job, and your eyelids are getting heavier. You're drifting now, somewhere between content and curious. But the scent of cumin and garlic still clings to your thoughts. You rise from your mat slowly, joints just a little reluctant, and wander toward the kitchens, the quiet engines behind Egypt's daily rhythm. And let's be clear, ancient Egyptian kitchens weren't the airy, Pinterest-friendly havens of modern design. They were smoky, hot, and often tucked in the corners of courtyards or on rooftops to keep the heat away from living spaces. Still, they were full of life-sizzling sounds, clinking pottery, occasional yelling about burnt bread or a wandering goat. You enter one now? A woman stoops over a clay oven, stoking the coals with practiced ease. Her face is lined, but her hands are quick. She's baking flatbreads, again always the bread. Flour dusts the floor in her elbows. A small boy runs past her with a handful of leeks and an alarming disregard for balance. Kitchens were run primarily by women, not always alone. Older girls, servants, and sometimes even the men helped, especially during big feasts. But the knowledge of flavor, storage, and fire belonged largely to the women. Recipes weren't written. They were felt. A pinch of this, a handful of that, a prayer to keep the beans from sticking. You crouch near the hearth. A pot simmers gently, lid slightly askew. You peek inside. Stew, perhaps? Oh, it's a sweet porridge. Today crushed wheat, soaked dates, and a bit of milk. A midday treat or maybe an offering. It's hard to tell which, but both are sacred in their own way. Historians still debate the specifics of these recipes. We have ingredient lists, drawings, even fragments of cooking instructions usually offered up in tombs or scratched into tablets, but the how is still a mystery. How long did they soak the chickpeas? No. When did they know to add the sycamore fig syrup? Did they taste as they cooked, or was it all by instinct? You watch now as a younger woman chops greens mallows, maybe, and folds them into a pot with lentils and garlic. Her rhythm is steady. She hums, and the knife keeps time. A jug clinks nearby. Beer again, but not for drinking this time. She's pouring a little into the stew. You raise an eyebrow. She grins without looking up. Adds body, she might say. Or maybe she just likes the taste. Another pot holds simmering fish small Nile perch, stuffed with coriander and wrapped in fig leaves. But the smell is stronger than you'd prefer, but undeniably rich. She flips one with a wooden spatula carved from tamarisk. It hisses. You flinch slightly. She doesn't. You step outside for a moment to escape the smoke and walk around to the storage rooms, schooler spaces tucked underground or shaded with thick clay walls. Inside, jars of dried legumes, sealed pots of honey, baskets of onions, garlic, and preserved fruit. The dried dates are darker than you've seen before, almost black, but they shine with syrup. A handwritten inventory sits nearby, etched into a potsherd. Counts of lentils, grain, Beer vessels, not for show, it's for survival. Remember the ancient fridge? Here it is, a large porous jar with water slowly evaporating through its walls, cooling the contents inside. It holds goat's milk, still fresh. Somehow a cat slinks past your ankle, uninterested in your admiration of ancient refrigeration. He's here for the fish scraps and the occasional unattended roll. Back in the kitchen, someone has started pounding seeds with a mortar and pestle. Fenugreek, perhaps, or caraway. The scent explodes upward in a puff of spice. You lean over and inhale, sharp and sweet and oddly nostalgic, like something between licorice and fresh bread. Your stomach growls again. You're surprised it's only been, 30 minutes? But you realize now, this kitchen isn't just about meals. It's about memory. Each smell, each motion, connects to something: rituals, celebrations, remedies. That pot of garlic and greens? That's dinner for a family of 5 and an offering to a household god. That date porridge? A birthday tradition passed down from a grandmother's grandmother. A tiny jar of honey being carefully unsealed now. Medicine for a sore throat or heartbreak, maybe both. One cook brings out dried herbs wrapped in linen, her fingers gentle. You catch a trace of thyme, maybe mint. She dips the bundle in warm water, then presses it to her own wrist with a sigh. Even healers need healing. And here's a surprise: music. One girl hums a tune while grinding barley, and the others pick it up like a torch. It's not particularly beautiful, but it's warm, comforting. You hum along despite not knowing a single word. Some kitchens were attached to temples or elite households, and their scale was astounding. Rows of ovens, storage rooms, the size of modern garages, dozens of servants preparing meals not for 2 or 10, but hundreds. Priests were well fed. Meals offered to the gods were often redistributed to them. You imagine walking into one of those sacred kitchens, no more quiet, more orderly, but filled with the same smells. Then there were traveling kitchens. Soldiers on campaign, merchants on riverboats, work crews far from home, fires dug into the ground, flatbread slapped onto hot rocks, dried lentils soaked overnight in goatskin pouches. One cook kept a tiny clay oven tied to his cart. Another wrapped meat in wet clay, buried it under coals, and cracked it open like a gift at sunset. You marvel at the adaptability, the resilience. It's the idea that even in the harshest settings, people found time to make something warm, something tasty, something worth sharing. The sun begins to droop in the sky now, casting long shadows across the courtyard. The kitchen slows. Bowls are washed in basins of sandy water. Leftovers are wrapped in linen or fed to the animals. The last pot is covered with a woven lid. Ashes are swept. The fire dies down, reluctantly. Sit quietly as the final smells linger: roasted onion, warm milk, faint beer foam. It's like the kitchen sighs in its sleep. You lean back, feeling the fullness, not just of belly, but of understanding. This was more than cooking. This was continuity. And tomorrow, the kitchen will rise again, in rhythm with the sun and the clatter of clay. You step softly into the evening now, leaving behind the kitchen's warmth, your sandals brushing the dusty ground as the light begins to fade from gold to amber. The village quiets, but there's still movement. Children herded inside, animals tied, final jars sealed with wax and hope. And just as your stomach settles from lunch, you begin to hear it. The soft rhythm of pestles, the murmur of water poured, the telltale crackle of fire being coaxed to life again. Dinner's coming, but it's not the same kind of meal. Breakfast was fuel, lunch a necessity, but dinner's something else entirely. It's slower, more intentional. The sun's work is done, the tools are set down, and for a brief window, people gather not just to eat, but to be. The fire pit has been cleaned, relit. Smoke curls lazily up toward the evening stars, and a pot hangs low above the flame. You take a seat nearby, feeling the warmth brush your ankles. An old man fans the embers with a folded reed mat, while telling a story, something about a lost cow, a moonlit thief, and a very confused baboon. You're not sure you follow, but it makes the others laugh. The pot begins to simmer. Inside, it's a barley and lentil stew tonight, thickened with bits of yesterday's bread, spiced with crushed coriander, cumin, and a dash of sour pomegranate juice. You blink at that last ingredient, but they assure you it cuts the richness. You nod as if you've always known. Historians still argue about how much meat was eaten in the average Egyptian household. The evidence is tricky. Bones found in dumps suggest that fish and fowl were more common than beef or lamb. But tomb paintings seem to show meat feasts aplenty. Were those daily realities or idealized afterlife dreams? No one's quite sure. Tonight, however, you get the real deal. A small goose, plucked and roasting slowly over coals, turned every few minutes by a boy no older than 10. He's completely serious about his job, lips pursed, eyes narrowed. A single burnt feather would bring the mockery of the entire household. Someone offers you a side of roasted garlic and mashed chickpeas, spiked with herbs and drizzled with sesame oil. It's thick, creamy, warm like the hummus, but deeper, smokier. You tear a soft barley roll and scoop it up, licking your fingers after. Very unroyal of you. No one seems to mind. Date wine appears now, not the usual sour beer, but something sweeter. Fermented in clay jugs and served in wide-mouthed bowls, you take a sip. It's syrupy and warm, with a hint of spice. Possibly cardamom, possibly just age. Either way, it works. Then there are the dips. One is made of crushed broad beans, another of cooked radish greens with vinegar and sesame. A third is just thick yogurt with mint and cucumber. You spoon a little of each onto your plate, overwhelmed but delighted. Nearby, a woman kneads dough for dessert. It's mixed with honey and dried figs, formed into tiny spirals and placed on a hot stone to bake. The smell, when it hits you, nearly knocks you over. You lean into it like a cat into sunshine. Someone breaks out an instrumental lute, perhaps, or something like it. He plucks a slow lullaby rhythm. Children curl on woven mats. The youngest has a smear of garlic dip across her cheek. A dog lies near the fire, twitching in a dream about something worth chasing. You eat slowly, between sips of wine and chuckles at the old man's second story. This one involves a missing sandal. It's a sneaky priest, and an ostrich with boundary issues. You try not to laugh too loud, but a snort escapes. The others grin knowingly. The stars are out now, clear and sharp. The Nile's breeze brushes past, and you wrap a shawl a little tighter around your shoulders. Someone adds dried reeds to the fire. They crackle and pop like tiny drum beats. The stew thickens, the goose is carved, and a platter of pickled onions makes its rounds. You ask yourself, how did they preserve all this food? Salt, mostly. It's also vinegar, sun-drying, and clever use of clay. Meat was smoked, fish was brined, fruit was left to shrivel sweetly on rooftops. And grains were stored in massive silos, sealed against moisture, guarded like gold. In wealthier homes, servants might have added imported spices, cinnamon from Punt pepper from India. But tonight, here under the stars, simplicity reigns. The flavors are local, seasonal, earned. A little girl passes you a bowl. It's rice pudding or something like it. Sweetened with date syrup and dusted with nut powder. You taste it and blink. It's perfect. No better word. Comforting like a memory you didn't know you had. Someone sighs. Another sneezes. Okay? A pair of older cousins begins to argue gently about whether the goose should be been cooked upside down. You let it all wash over you like warm water. The fire dims. Bellies are full. Even the goose-sterning boy is finally allowed to rest. His reward a second helping and an early bedtime. Dinner ends not with a bang, but a drowsy shuffle. Plates are cleared, faces wiped, children carried inside. Few linger, sipping the last of the wine, speaking softly of the coming flood. The neighbor's troublesome goat, the strange dreams they had last week. You sit a little longer, the last stew warmth in your belly, and think, this isn't just dinner, this is anchoring. This is how you end a day with food, with people, with peace. And with that final bite of honey fig spiral pastry melting on your tongue, you smile. Tomorrow will come. The lentils will boil again. Fire will crackle. Someone will tell a new story about an even more confused baboon. You wake to the gentle creak of morning, no alarms, no hustle. It's just birds murmuring along the Nile and the distant clip of sandals against packed earth. It's while your modern instinct might be to reach for coffee. Here in ancient Egypt, you stretch, stand, find yourself already pulled toward the garden. It's not a grand garden, not by royal standards, but it's alive in every way that matters. Neatly ordered rows of beans and lentils, leafy mallows waving lazily in the breeze. and date palms casting striped shadows like nature's own awnings. The gardener, hunched and humming, barely notices you. He's busy with a clay watering jar, pouring slowly, precisely, each plant receiving just enough, not a drop more. Food starts here, always. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. It all depends on soil, sun, and one man's careful fingers. You crouch beside him and watch. The onions are almost ready, the garlic too. He crushes a clove between two fingers, holds it to your nose. Pungent, earthy, the good kind. Egyptian gardens weren't just practical, they were deeply symbolic.
Ow.
Temples had sacred groves. The rich had pleasure gardens with lotus ponds and shaded benches. Even modest homes had small kitchen plots, squeezed between mudbrick walls, nurturing leeks, cucumbers, and fragrant herbs. And that's when you spotted a low patch of something leafy and unfamiliar. The gardener sees your curiosity and grins. Jew's mallow, he might say, or malokia as it's known later. The leaves boiled down make a slippery, rich green soup, still eaten today. Egyptians are nothing if not loyal to their culinary history. Historians still debate how diverse the Egyptian plant diet really was. Some argue that the average peasant had little variety, relying mostly on barley and lentils. Others suggest that even modest homes had surprising access to herbs, greens, and seasonal fruits, especially in fertile regions near the delta. The truth, likely somewhere in between, as usual. You move further along the garden's edge and spot an orchard of sycamore figs big. Nobly things with rough skin and a sweet, jammy center. A woman plucks one, splits it with a practiced twist, and hands you half. It's sticky, warm from the sun, and you find yourself licking your fingers before even realizing it. Beyond her, a boy gathers pomegranates into a woven basket, their ruby skins gleaming. One falls, splits open, scattering seeds like little edible jewels across the ground. He scoops them up quickly, some for eating, some for juicing, and, if rumor is true, one or two for spitting at his brother later. Then come the the dates. Brown, gold, nearly black, dried, stuffed, mashed, brewed.
Ow.
You pass a palm where bunches hang like chandeliers. A man climbs with an ease that defies logic, plucking only the ripest clusters. You bite into one. It's like honey and sun and thyme, all wrapped into a single mouthful. You wander next to the herbs: dill, coriander, fenugreek, thyme. Some grow wild between the stones. Others are carefully cultivated. A girl crushes a sprig between her palms and presses it under her nose, inhaling deeply. You try the same. It's like breathing in memory, ancient, aromatic, strangely grounding. The garden also hides medicine. Licorice root, for sore throats. Garlic, of course, for everything. Mustard seed, carob, even aloe, that scarab-shaped plant by your foot, used for fevers. The woman tending it smiles knowingly, as if she's seen every ailment and every cure. And then, a small patch of watermelon vines. Yes, even those. Egyptians were eating them thousands of years ago, long before backyard barbecues or seed-spitting contests. These are smaller, paler, but just as sweet. A child slices one open with a copper knife, and the pink flesh glistens in the sun. Someone nearby is tending bees, or rather tending to where the bees have decided to live, a clay hive tucked beneath a fig tree. The honey is gathered sparingly, smoked out with gentle puffs, scraped from wax with reed spoons. Thick, golden, the good kind. The kind that might flavor a sauce or sweeten porridge or soothe a burn. You sit now, shaded by the wall of a mud-brick house, watching the sun rise higher. The garden seems to stretch forever. It's not wild, not chaotic. It's human-shaped nature, bent toward survival, but also flavor, ritual, pleasure. Someone brings out a breakfast bowl, not grand, just a simple lentil mash, warm and garlicky, topped with chopped herbs from just over there. It tastes like effort, like a morning's work, like earth and water and a gardener's backache. The Nile breezes reach you again, palm fronds flutter. A few chickens scurry after bugs in the underbrush, each a tiny custodian of scraps and seeds. A goose hisses half-heartedly as a cat slinks by with something unidentifiable in its mouth. The usual chaos of life, held loosely in balance. And now a soft sound flutes. No, just wind through reeds, but the rhythm is the same. Even here, among vegetables and sun, the music finds you. You lean back, eyes half closed, and think everything you've tasted began here. Rooted in this patient dirt grown by hands that knew the seasons, the pests, the joy of watching a fig tree fruit. There is a saying among the gardeners here. The plant doesn't care for gold, only for water. You smile at that. It's as true for people, isn't it? You exhale, slow and steady. The garden smells of life of all its cycles, bitter and sweet, tangled and tender. And you feel oddly deeply grateful for the roots beneath you, for the flavors that follow. The day softens now. The heat has dipped, shadows stretch longer, and the garden settles into hush. You drift back toward the house belly warm, hands scented faintly of fig leaves and coriander. A few lingering bees buzz around the clay hive as you step lightly past. Inside, the kitchen hearth glows faintly, not with fire now, but with warmth that lingers after a long day. You spot the leftover stew pot, crusted gently around the rim, a sure sign of a meal well savored. Someone will scrape it clean later, maybe for tomorrow's breakfast stock. You find a mat near the window and lie down. The shutters creak gently in the breeze. From the neighbor's courtyard, you hear low laughter and the clink of dishes. The end of the day is communal here, not in spectacle, but in rhythm. Everything slowing, everything softening. And even as your eyes grow heavy, your thoughts wander back across the day. You remember the barley rolls dusted in flour, warm from the oven stones. You recall the boy guarding the goose with all the solemnity of a Pharaoh's vizier. You smile at the honey fig pastries, at the garlic smear on the little girl's cheek, at the muddled story about the moonlight thief and the baboon with trust issues. You recall, too, the way food was stored not in refrigerators, but in cool ceramic jars, sunk into shaded floors, oil jugs sealed with wax, bread baskets hung from rafters to outwit mice, pickles sun fermented with brine and faith. There's beauty in this simplicity, a kind of culinary intimacy you hadn't expected. Historians still wonder just how much of ancient Egyptian food culture was daily habit versus ceremonial excess. Tomb art shows feasts of wild birds, platters of fruits, even tables groaning with what could be fish, Peter. But how much of that was real, and how much was hopeful dreaming? No one knows. And maybe that's the point, because here now, as your breath slows and the air cools, you understand something you couldn't have just reading the facts. Food wasn't just fuel. It was a way of being, a way of anchoring people to time, to place, to each other. You think about the gardeners rising early, the bakers sweating by dawn, the beer brewers swatting flies from bubbling vats, the mothers spooning lentils into tiny mouths, the old men cracking puns over cracked clay bowls. You remember the spice seller's stall tucked beneath a canopy, where tiny jars held smells so vivid you could nearly see the colors? The dried fenugreek, the black cumin seeds. The unfamiliar powder you swore smelled like cinnamon, pepper, and maybe ... goat. You didn't ask. And there were rules, too. Food laws tied to temples, seasonal offerings to gods' loaves, shaped like cattle, ducks dried for raw, onions offered to Osiris. Even death didn't stop the meal. Tombs held preserved bread, dried dates, sometimes even little jars of honey and beer. Just in case eternity got peckish, there's a reason Egyptians placed food so close to their sense of the divine. Eating was a ritual, a spell, a way of tasting continuity. When you swallowed lentil stew, you were participating in the same pattern your ancestors had followed for thousands of years. You were part of the Nile story, your eyelids droop. The wind whispers through the shutters again, cool now, carrying the scent of river reeds and distant fires. In the courtyard, a woman hums as she folds a linen cloth. A dog whines once in its sleep. Somewhere nearby, a cat knocks over a bowl. No one stirs. Life will pick up again with the sunrise. But for now, everything exhales. You pull the woven blanket higher, and your fingers graze a small flat loaf left beside your mat. Maybe for tomorrow's breakfast, maybe as a kindness. It smells faintly of fennel and ash. You don't need it now, but you smile at the thought. And with that, your breath slows, your mind softens. The day behind you settles into memory, warm and slow as honey. The garden slips into silence. The hearth embers give their final glow, and the Nile itself seems to hush its endless murmur. Even the stars above the same stars they watched 3,000 years ago, blink slowly, sleepily, like guardians of your dreams. But you're still here, in that mudbrick house, tucked beneath a palm frond roof. A woven mat under your head, the scents of coriander and roasted garlic lingering in the air. Maybe someone places another log on the fire. Maybe the cat curls beside your ankle. Or maybe nothing moves at all. Your breath deepens, your mind slows. No decisions to make here. No emails, no headlines. Just the gentle rhythm of a world far older and far quieter than your own. In this world, time is measured in seasons, in floods, in the turning of stars. Meals are made slowly by hand, shared with laughter, and the occasional story about goats behaving badly. People don't eat in a rush here. They don't sleep with screens glowing inches from their faces. They rest when it's dark. They rise with the sun. Simple, yes, but not lacking. And maybe that's the gift tonight. Reminder that nourishment can be slow, that rest can be deep, that somewhere, long ago, someone fell asleep full of barley stew, a smile on their lips under the same quiet sky. So drift now. Let the shutters rattle softly in your dreams. Let the date palms sway in your memory. Let ancient Egypt hold you warm, fed, safe. Good night.